So if you walk out into a busy city center or a shopping mall on any given Saturday, especially after payday, you will see hordes of people milling about, seemingly searching for something of great importance. Yeah, of course, you might think, they're searching for something to buy. But are they really? Perhaps they're not so much searching for something to buy, but rather for themselves, or at least a slightly better version of themselves. Because marketers and advertisers are really, really good at giving us the impression that we have somehow lost ourselves, that we are somehow incomplete, and that their market offerings can provide us with the cultural resources necessary to rediscover or complete our real, true selves. Most of us don't spend a lot of time actively thinking about and scrutinizing advertising and commercial messages. We simply don't have time to do it. A person living in an industrial area such as Stockholm is bombarded with thousands of commercial messages every day. We're bombarded with such messages from when we get up in the morning. We see them on social media, in the newspapers, on the radio, on the TV, and then on the subways going to work, and then it just goes on and on and on until we switch our phones off at night. So there is no doubt plenty of such commercial messages around, but do they have an impact? When most people are asked about advertising, they say two things. First, they state that they themselves are not that influenced by advertising, or at least that they're only influenced by it when they choose to let themselves be influenced. Second, they voice concern that others are overly influenced, that others lack the willpower and intellectual prowess necessary to fend off these attractive messages. Especially children and others with less developed mental capacities, such as their partners, their friends, their colleagues, well, just about anyone else except for themselves. So, yeah, funny how that happens. So, is this true, one might then ask? Are we really not that affected by advertising? Well, of course we are. Companies wouldn't spend billions and billions of dollars on advertising if it didn't have any effect on their market performance. But companies don't always know in what ways their advertising is effective. An old saying in the advertising world is that half of all the money spent on advertising is wasted. The problem is, we just don't know what half. But we also know that we are affected by advertising, even though we might think that we are not. As consumers and individuals, we like to nurture the fantasy that we're strong individuals whose tastes for various goods and services emanate from within, from who we are, and that we are not that affected by others informing our preferences. But advertising doesn't only work in the sense that it makes us buy certain products and services. Advertising also provides us with idealized images of how we should live our lives, how we should actualize ourselves as human beings. Advertising is thus an existential issue. If we want to give the companies the benefit of the doubt, we can say that this is an unintended side effect of advertising. And this latter role, the existential issue, is seldom talked about, quite simply because it is seldom acknowledged, because we rarely take advertising seriously. An old, kind of a truism in advertising is that companies want happy customers. And I'm not going to argue against this. It's probably good if a person who has spent their money on a company's product offering feel that they have gotten their money's worth and haven't been cheated in the process, at least not too much. But on an aggregate level, companies do not want us as consumers to be happy in the sense that we are satisfied with our lives just the way they are. On the contrary, companies want us as consumers to be miserable and feel that our lives could and should be so much better. Companies want us to feel incomplete. They thrive on us feeling incomplete. And then, nice as they are, the companies out there offering to help us reach our true potential as human beings. So I want to give an example now of this unintended side effect of advertising that I'm talking about. So large Swedish retailer IKEA have recently run a series of ads trying to get us to buy more beds. How are they doing this? Well, on a surface level, it might appear that they're saying that, IKEA's beds are really comfortable and of high quality, so money invested in a bed from IKEA will assure you many years of comfortable sleep. And that's not too bad, is it? Well, if we scratch the surface a little bit, another image appears in which IKEA is suggesting that we are somehow incomplete. There is an underlying message here telling us that we are not sleeping as well as we potentially could. IKEA is asking us if we are perhaps sometimes experiencing fatigue during a long day. Perhaps we're not always jumping out of the bed in the morning feeling all perky and ready to meet the day. Most of us don't have a very hard time connecting to this type of a message, do we? Being tired in the morning and feeling that one could have gotten a better night's sleep, that isn't very unique. But what IKEA does is that they suggest that this is something that we as consumers have chosen. We have chosen this misery by not letting IKEA sell us a bed that would rid us of these problems. If we would only let this benevolent company help us sleep through the night, we would be a better version of ourselves. We would be much nicer, and it's our choice. And it seems like a lot of us are choosing misery. So this is a recurrent pattern. We are told over and over again that we are not living up to our true potential. And then we are sold the solution. So advertising collectively thus breaks us down. You can kind of compare this to how it works in the military when young cadets join the military and are forced into a boot camp where they are being broken down mentally only to be built up again, but totally according to the principles of the military. We as consumers are being broken down to some degree, and then we are sold the solution. But really, being broken down, is that an adequate description of what is going on? Let us return now to that introductory image of busy shopping areas and hordes of people milling about searching for something to buy or themselves, if I can have it my way. These hordes of people, do they really live up to the image of a broken collective? No. Not really. Rather, the collective feeling during these shopping outings is one of excitement, of fun, and even of gratitude. But this is entirely consistent with my argument. If one want to put it in slightly polarized terms, one could say that once we, as consumers, have been sufficiently broken down, we are just happy and thankful for the companies providing us with the cultural resources necessary to build ourselves up again. So I do think it's important to point out that advertising in the commercial world is not necessarily about providing glitz and glamour. It is about getting us to experience misery. Yeah, I know, I might appear like a left-wing teenage activist who fell asleep in the 70s and just woke up, beware of the market. Am I not making too much out of this? Isn't this borderline conspiracy theory? Well, this belittlement of advertising's unintended side effects is exactly what I'm talking about. The commercial world get away with this by being banal enough not to be taken seriously. Because really serious cultural critics would spend their days discussing serious things, high culture such as art, literature, drama, and so forth. They wouldn't get their hands dirty with something as silly as advertising. Advertising's effect on our current society is therefore largely underanalyzed. And perhaps I'm even an example of this myself. I'm Sweden's first professor of advertising and PR, so it doesn't really seem like the university system have been lining up to direct, systematic attention to these kinds of issues. So being here at TEDx Stockholm, I want to compare this to a Stockholm Syndrome situation. The Stockholm Syndrome describes a situation in which those held hostage during a hostage crisis start siding with the captors rather than with those trying to rescue them. So in the image I'm painting here, I'm suggesting that the consumers are being held hostage by the market forces. But rather than being angry at the market for breaking them down and making them feel worthless, the consumers are praising the market for providing them the cultural resources necessary for building themselves up again. And people like me, who like to see ourselves as rescuers and who like to point to this dynamic between the market and culture and individual consumers, and who like to suggest that we're all involved in a sinister game, well, we're met with anger and accused of being patronizing bullies. So what I'm describing here is a paradigm shift in which the commercial world is increasingly shaping culture. I want to give an example here dealing with brands, because I think that our society's love for brands is one of the surest signs of this paradigm shift. And more specifically, I want to talk about brand tattoos. Because today there are plenty of people out there with Pepsi or Reebok, Nike, Adidas, Harley Davidson, Apple, Honda, Volvo, Lego, or Jägermeister tattoos, just to name a few. So why would someone choose to get a brand tattoo? Before we can even start trying to explain that, we need to know a little bit more about what goes into choosing a tattoo. So research about tattooing suggests that someone gets a tattoo typically because it helps them tell a story about who they are or who they want to become. And the motive is chosen because it helps them tell that story. And when it comes to traditional tattoos, there are a number of traditional categories of motives that are used. For example, religious motives, folkloristic motives, motives from popular culture, or symbols from foreign cultures that one somehow looks up to. And many times the reasoning seems to go something like this. This here is the Chinese symbol for balance and harmony, and that is exactly what I aspire for in life. Yeah, this is a somewhat simplified but reasonably accurate description of what goes into choosing a tattoo. So what about brand tattoos then? Well, many times they're brushed off as jokes or as irony, which is indicative of our society's willingness to not take these issues seriously. Because I would suggest that someone who chooses to tattoo a brand symbol onto their body doesn't do that to be funny or to be ironic, but because that symbol accurately helps them tell a story about who they are or who they want to become. So brands thereby have become symbols that are on par with other symbols floating around in our society. So someone who tattoos a Nike swoosh on their ankle doesn't do that to be funny or ironic, but because they feel that Nike's just do it ethos kind of encapsulates their life philosophy. Just like a yin-yang symbol might work for someone else. And someone who tattoos a Jägermeister logo on their forearm doesn't do that to be a prankster or because they're a fool duped by the market, but because that tattoo accurately helps them tell a story of how they're a reckless party animal to the relevant others. Someone from a different background might have tattooed an image of Greek god Dionysus in order to convey the same meaning. So, what I'm describing here is that brands have become symbols that consumers use to make sense of our contemporary world. So we're seeing that the commercial world is simultaneously providing us with identity templates for how we should live our lives and selling us the props necessary to orchestrate a suitable identity. And this is a remarkable change of our cultural landscape. There have always been identity templates telling us how we should live our lives. Identity templates of what is an ideal man, woman, husband, wife, child, parent, family, workplace, colleague, and so forth. Where do these ideals come from? Well, traditionally, they've come from the state, the church, schools, and of course the high cultures. And it's not that these traditional identity templates and authorities are necessarily freer or more forgiving than the ones provided by the market, but they are systematically analyzed by cultural critics. In fact, it's the essence of a free intellectual society that these important cultural authorities are systematically scrutinized and debated. But what is shocking, however, is that so little attention is directed at the ideological content of the totality of commercial messages that we are showered with on an everyday basis. So I would love for the cultural critics of our society to take consumer society seriously. And I would love for the editors of our newspapers and magazines to leave room for a meticulous analysis of commercial messages and consumer goods. I would love for more of us to connect the dots between what we experience as our own private individual desire to buy stuff and the billions of dollars spent on advertising and the thousands of commercial messages that we are bombarded with on an everyday basis. I would love for more of us to be just somewhat skeptical when we, seemingly shocked, burst into things like, "Wow, it's amazing, I've been looking for exactly this type of jacket for a really long time." I would love for more of us to then at least spend a little time thinking about why we started craving that jacket in the first place. And while I'm not necessarily advocating a radical shift in how we organize our current market society, I would like to cry out a call to arms. We need to take advertising and brands' role in society seriously. And we need to start looking at the ideological content of advertising, rather than to merely view it as some glamorized type of product information. And we need to arm ourselves with a reasonable set of tools in order to understand the kind of games that we are involved in. Thank you.